Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to both the ambassador and the administrator for the work that you're doing. Is Russia trying to starve the world? I mean, are they intent on causing pain, on causing pain in Egypt and Lebanon and throughout North Africa and the Middle East? I mean, is this part of their intent, or are they simply intending to starve Ukraine? And willing to ignore the fact that what they're doing is, in starving Ukraine, is also starving the world. Do you have a sense of what their intent is, what they're thinking?
I can't speak for what is going on in Putin's mind, but I think at the start of this, they thought they were going to have a quick war, bring Ukraine to their knees in 2 weeks, and have them waving the white flag, and that would be the end of it. And that failed. And so they're continuing this effort to starve the people of Ukraine, and in the process starve the rest of the world, and they don't care. Which is why it is so important that we have gotten the support, bipartisan support from this Congress to provide for people in the rest of the world. What the Russians are now doing is blaming us, that our sanctions are responsible for what is happening in the rest of the world, when in fact there are no sanctions on their agricultural products, there are no sanctions on their fertilizer. They can move their agricultural products, they can move their wheat if they wanted to do it. But they would prefer to blame the rest of the world, thinking that will get them more support from the world, and I think they've failed.
But Ambassador, why is it they are so effective at spreading lies, and we're so terribly ineffective at telling the truth and having the world understand what's going on? I would think the leaders of Egypt and Lebanon and other places that have seen astronomical increases in prices would be yelling about what Russia is doing. I don't see that. Why are we so incapable of making sure the world understands Russia's malevolence, the impact they're having on the world, and creating, if you will, global pressure, not just from the nations of the West, but global pressure on Russia? Why are we so ineffective?
I wouldn't say we're ineffective. I think we certainly have to ramp up our efforts, but this is something that we all work on every single day to counter Russia's disinformation. We do it in the United Nations, in meetings, and we do it in our travels around the world. And I think countries are hearing it. They're hearing it, but they're also dealing with other issues. They're dealing with not only Russia's disinformation, they're dealing with Russia's intimidation. We know that when we had to vote in the UN, that the Russians actually sent written correspondence to countries to say, if you vote against us, we will no longer, this will affect our long-term relationship. So these countries are dealing with these other efforts, but I think, again, to have 141 countries condemn Russia, they are resisting that pressure, and they do understand that Russia is responsible for this war. Now, that doesn't mean Russia doesn't have its friends. The 4 or 5 countries that voted with them, including China, and the friends their friends are always there for them, but they're few and far between.
Ambassador Power, what other nations are stepping in to make sure that the food crisis being created by Russia and its blockade, if you will, on Ukraine is in some respects getting some relief? Is India stepping up to the extent they should? Are other parts of the world making the kinds of efforts they should? And are we, as a nation, stepping in? We in Canada and others that have bountiful agricultural resources.
Thank you, Senator. And if I may just pick up on your exchange with Ambassador Thomas Greenfield, I would just note that the Belt and Road Initiative and China's investments throughout sub-Saharan Africa, Latin America, the Caribbean, the Pacific have gotten a lot of attention. I do not think that the RT penetration and the Russian disinformation media machine have received the same attention, nor I think would we say that we are resourcing our information efforts as a country as we did during the Cold War, for example, or not even close to how they resource them. That's not the only answer. Again, we are blasting our message out as many places as we can, and I think probably the only reason Putin's in those negotiations with the UN and Turkey right now is the number of the number of African countries that privately, not publicly in the way that we do, have either paid trips to Moscow to appeal for those grains to be released so the prices go down, or that wheat arrives. And I think that pressure has brought him to the table. Whether it'll be enough to bring him to actually allow the grains go.
I fully just want to say I fully agree with you that we are not paying the kind of attention or devoting the kind of resources to communicating the truth to the world as Russia is spending to communicate lies.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I agree completely. To your question, just on sort of division of labor and so forth, I would say you mentioned India specifically, which hasn't come up yet at the hearing. India has been very responsive to the complete economic collapse in Sri Lanka, extending grants and mainly loans to a government that, of course, fell, but now a new government that is in great economic peril. That is a country that has defaulted on its debt payments for the first time in its history. And it's probably just the first of at least several and maybe many governments that are likely to fall by virtue of these higher prices, particularly fuel prices, as we head into winter. With regard to some of what we've been talking about, I did want to call out and commend some of the very discreet efforts on actually dealing with the trapping of Ukrainian grains. Japan has chipped in $23 million to help the Ukrainians buy storage bags. The European Commission has provided direct cash grants to farmers, around $53 million. The UK, which has dramatically cut, unfortunately, its foreign assistance budgets at the worst possible time, but has contributed $12 million to help rebuild the railways that are being attacked, which helps get the food out. So these kind of modest efforts, but as I mentioned, I think before you got here, if you look at the response, for example, to the potential famine in the Horn of Africa, other countries, our friends who stepped up the last time there was a very severe drought, are right now, many of them at about 8% of what they funded before. Now, some of that is because they are funding so generously inside Ukraine and, of course, to Ukrainians who are coming into Europe. But this is this burden, also this privilege of helping people in their hour of need is being borne very disproportionately by the United States right now.